All right, everybody, welcome back to the Overwatch Collective podcast, season 6, episode 6, with Brooke in lovely San Diego via Zoom. Brooke, how are we doing?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Happy to have you on. We are going to get into this episode, and so little quick introduction about Brooke. So she is the owner. She says owner, but you can also make it like president, CEO, founder of Center for Trauma, Anxiety, and Stress. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, has extensive training with first responder and military. Like, not even going to try to list off some of the things because we'd be here for 30 minutes. You can see people in California and Florida, first responders and military, which is perfect for our community at the Overwatch Collective. And she's worked at a few places, just to name a few: VA San Diego, Houston Fire Department, National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress, Boston VA. She travels to go to departments to give trainings and everything. We did a Zoom last week and it was like, oh, wow, you do a lot of stuff. We could probably end up doing like a 3-hour podcast. But we are going to keep it. Let's see. So I have a podcast at 11 and Brooke has a therapy session at 11. So we'll try to keep it around probably like an hour and then give us time to have a little break, but we'll see.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Take it away. Give us a quick little introduction about yourself and then what you like to do.
All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke. So Greg covered a good chunk of it, but I am a licensed psychologist. And so I started, the long road and training back took about 15 years or so to get to the licensed psychologist part. So undergraduate degree in psychology, and I went from there to get my master's degree from Boston University, and then started working at the National Center for PTSD there, which is in Boston at the Boston VA. So doing a lot of PTSD research with combat veterans for a few years. And then I went to go get my PhD, and it was at that time, right when I started before I even set foot in Houston for my PhD program, we had just started working and connecting with the Houston Fire Department. So I started doing research with firefighters before I even set foot in Houston, but basically fell in love with it immediately. I was like, wow, there's a lot of overlap between military and first responders. And so what drew me to working with military, and what I was so passionate about was really ignited when I started working with first responders. So I spent the rest of my 6 years of doctoral level training working with first responders. So I was on call 24/7. I was there at the critical incidents. I was there at the funerals. I was there at the promotions. I also had a couple days in an office doing therapy with first responders and their loved ones. And then I did a lot of like wellness programming, built up peer support programs, suicide prevention programs, all of that. And again, I knew very, very soon that, okay, this is the road I want to continue going and specializing in. And then I had to go, you have to be a psychologist. After your 5 years of doctoral training, you have to do residency. So you have to do a couple of years of training, just working full time in a hospital. And so I worked at the San Diego VA in the post-traumatic stress clinics, doing some more training there, and then opened up my business right when I finished my postdoc and got licensed. So here I am today.
Yeah, that's quite the fucking bio. Like, holy hell.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. No, it definitely is a lot. And it's funny, like when you're going through all those things, and I'm like, oh, I want to touch on that. I want to touch on that.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is where we'd be here for literally 3 hours.
Yeah.
Cool. So now you're seeing people virtually, telehealth, California and Florida, correct?
Correct.
And you're also traveling. So what does your like normal week look like?
Oh, I don't have a normal week. That's the thing. It really differs.
Well. You fit in really well with the first responder community by saying that.
Yeah, so I don't have a normal week. I mean, like you said, so I have a handful of therapy clients that, we see each other virtually. Again, that I don't have an in-person office for therapy because I do so much of the wellness programming, and traveling for agencies. So when I'm not doing therapy, I can be doing a lot of different things. I get brought in to do peer support training and programming. I get brought in to do consulting, like, for example, helping an agency write out a formal policies for their peer support programming. I get brought in to do a lot of like educational seminars and presentations on a variety of different topics. I've created like materials, mental resource manuals for agencies that are specific to their location with all this information. So I do a lot of different things. So I do travel a lot to get brought in to do the trainings and the presentations and things like that. Some of it I do remotely. So it really is just kind of, it really depends on the week.
Yeah, you just never know.
Yeah. Which I kind of like, honestly. I'm like,
Yeah.
I couldn't do the 9 to 5 thing. You know, I trained a lot, did a lot of my rotations in VAs where I was working 9 to 5. And obviously there's definitely advantages to that, but it just doesn't really fit with my personality.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, there's like pros and cons to like having like an inconsistent schedule where it's like, oh, you just never know and you kind of go with the flow. But then sometimes it's nice to have a schedule. But I agree with you. I could never do a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 or whatever, sitting behind a desk. I would lose my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it's so much fun being like out on the street, like in a cop car, and you just never know what it's going to be like and all that. So, are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have a dog? Anything?
Yeah, I'm engaged and I have 2 doggos, and they're both snoozling in this room right now. So sorry in advance if you hear loud snoring. One of my dogs snores really loudly. Yeah, a little floofy Aussie, Australian Shepherd, and a mutt. She's like a pit bull mix. So yeah, you know, I call them my executive assistants because they're usually, you know, present with me in my office doing all the work with me. So
So I have a question with that. This is totally random. Your dogs, I know, like working with dogs is really good for like therapy and they can sense anxiety and all that. When you're seeing your clients, can they tell like a little bit, like, do they sense that at all? Like if some of that's being talked about, like some tough stuff going on?
that's a good question. No, maybe more in tune dogs would, but you know, mine are pretty checked out, you know.
Okay. Yeah, they're just passed out. They're like, no, I'm not
I mean,
working.
one of them in particular is just basically, you know, sleeping and stuff. They're both older. One's about 11. I'm not exactly sure. I adopted her as an adult, and then the other one just turned 9. So, you know, they snooze a lot. I'm just always like, y'all live rent free in this house, get 2 square meals a day and treats, and you know, you don't even spend an hour of a day working. So
I love it. I wouldn't change it though, because they're spoiled as could be. I know I showed you Luna on the couch and just like,
yeah.
yep, go ahead, walk wherever you want. You're spoiled. You live your life.
I'm telling you, one of the big like I love working with first responders because I love helping first responders, don't get me wrong, but I also love all the first responder dogs that I get to be around. So that is a huge perk of the job. Like, and my little by the way, thank you for sending, I got your patch.
Yes,
Right there.
nice.
But yeah, I have all like the stickers from all the dogs that I've met and their trading cards and all of that. So it's a great perk of the job.
Yeah, there's some like some of the most gentle and sweetest dogs, but then when you say like commands or you're like on a call, you're like, oh, I do not want to be on the other side.
Yeah, don't want to be on your bad side at all.
No, not at all. I've seen some gnarly stuff. I've actually got bitten by a canine as well. My arm and
Really?
leg, and it was on my leg, and then I tased it to get off. And that's a
How did that happen?
that's a whole different story.
Oh my gosh.
It was a call where essentially the dog went in through the front door of a house, went into the house, back door was open and could smell us in the backyard, and then just blah 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 blah. You know,
Oops. Friendly fire a little bit.
a little bit needed a little treat or something, so he got some of my fat from my leg. But so that
Yikes.
so cool. Where do you want to start? Like, do you want to start with the therapy side of things and like how people can see you working through the Overwatch Collective to see you? Do you want to talk about like peer support, traveling for departments, military PTSD, the work that you did there? Like, where do you want to go?
Let's start with the therapy side of things and then see where that goes.
All right, cool. So what's your first question? How many people do you allot like on your like at a time? Is there like 5 to 10 depending on how busy you are? Do you not try to take on too much of a caseload or what?
Yeah, I definitely, that's a good question. So it does depend, and it also depends on factors. Like I see a lot of people that come in like once every 2 weeks, right? And some the first responders I work with, like they come in on like, I call it as like an as needed. Like they don't necessarily want to or need to come in every week, but they know that they can reach out to me and schedule, with a little bit of time in advance, but they can reach out to me sometimes even on a Monday and be like, hey, do you have any availability this week? And I can get them scheduled in. So if we're talking about on a week to week basis, like if I had clients I'm seeing every week, I wouldn't take more than 15 clients. So I wouldn't be seeing more than 15 clients, generally speaking, on a given week. Sometimes, again, I see a little bit more depending on if all their sessions fall in the same week, but I definitely don't do therapy full time. So I try and keep my caseload a little bit lower, so to speak, because of all the other stuff that I do.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I know, so like on your website, and I think a lot of the common questions that we see in regards to therapy is number one, like because of the cost of therapy, right?
Yeah.
Like, and like how expensive it is these days. It's like, what insurance do you take? Why don't you take insurance?
Yeah.
Is there financial assistance available? So, like, for the first responder community, do you mind just touching on like the importance of like going to the right therapist instead of going through like your employment assistant program, where you may get matched with someone that doesn't have a bio like a freaking novel like yours, uh, and then where you may not have a good therapy session, you may not enjoy that therapist, um, as opposed to where it's like, hey, you're going to have to pay a hefty price, but you're going to get the right help, or you're going to go through financial assistance through us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not even gonna claim saying this. It was one of the first responders I'd with, and he's like, I've been telling people, based on my experience and how much it helped me, that it's an investment. And he said, and he goes, here's the thing too, is that it wasn't just an investment at that time. He says, I'm still reaping the benefits from that investment. So like when I met my goals and got to where I wanted to be, and I wasn't needing therapy anymore, I was still benefiting from that investment. And so I just kind of I like to throw that out there as like kind of a perspective look at it. I understand, there's money involved, and that's something, there can be some real logistical factors that go into that. But to think not only is it an investment at that time, but that if you're with the right therapist and someone who utilizes the right tools and is trained in what you're looking to get help with, those benefits can really be stretched out for a long time, right? For a very long time. So that's one thing I really like to point out with that. Um, a lot of specialized therapists and psychologists don't take insurance. And there's a few different, I'll just talk about from my reasons and my perspectives on that. One, again, spending so many years specializing and becoming very specialized and trained. Insurance companies are typically what we call generalist models. It'll just be kind of like to support like general talk therapy, and not necessarily specialized work in like trauma, anxiety, etc. And insurance companies are very greedy, meaning that they will take, in some cases, 75% of your fee and your income, like per session. It's a lot. They take a lot out, right? I'm not going to sit here and act like there's not a money thing involved, which is why I don't take insurance, because there is a big time gouging from the insurance companies. But the other major reasons too is insurance companies work from a diagnostic standpoint, which means that if I were to take insurance, I have to diagnose you with a mental health disorder. I have to prove why you need therapy. You have to have a reason to show that you're so bad off that you need therapy. So I have to give you a diagnosis, or they won't pay for it. which generally speaking, we're really moving away from that model, that diagnostic model of like, you need to have post-traumatic stress disorder or you don't get your therapy covered, or you need to have a full-fledged eating disorder or you don't get your therapy covered. Like, it's not only not scientifically based, but it can be very, very harmful as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, well, that also, like, from the first responder and the military side of it, right? That affects your career. That could affect you. Like, hey, you can no longer be a firefighter anymore. Maybe you're no
Mhm.
longer going to get promoted because now you're diagnosed because, there's a lot that goes on in regards to that, where it's like, oh no, it's like, okay, we'll take care of you, but you may not get that next promotion, or you may be
Mhm.
looked at differently. So it's so frustrating to hear that, because before, like, we started, like, I didn't really know of like another organization or a nonprofit that's like getting people in our first responder military community connected to like culturally competent therapists that are like vetted, but then also helping pay for it, where it's like, usually, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where you go to the peer support, you go to the departments, and through the employment assistant program, you may get 5 sessions for free, but then it's like, did you even enjoy those sessions? Did you get a lot out of it? And then what do you do now?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've, I mean, I'm not discouraging anyone from using their EAP because the success stories we don't really hear about as much. And I do know some first responders that have had success stories with it, and that's really great. And I've also heard of a lot of horror stories related to it. So, and like you said, in any case, any EAP program, it's short term, right? So you get 5 sessions, maybe I think I've heard of like 8 sessions, and then you can't utilize it anymore. And there's, for most people, unless they're going in just for a lot of people, you need a little bit more than 5 sessions. Um, but yeah, it's the other big thing too, when you're speaking about it, is another big reason why I don't take insurance too is there's confidentiality. So the insurance companies have full access and can access that person's file whenever they need to see and make sure that they have medical necessity that requires treatment, until they deem that they don't. So they have access to someone's um, records if need be. It's in the contracts. As a private pay provider, can't touch anything. Everything's completely confidential. It's all secure. It's all with me. No one gets to touch it.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things, I think, is that obviously I try to push, and what we provide and what we do and what we focus on is that confidentiality, because peer support teams, like, they're great, they all have a purpose, but if you break confidentiality one time in your department, you're fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, nobody's going to trust you anymore. So um do you mind touching on the importance of confidentiality that you see with your clients amongst the community?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, and that's also why having a culturally competent provider is really important, because it's very, so confidentiality is obviously something that's important whether you're a first responder or civilian, but it's particularly sacred in the first responder community. And it's very different when you're working with first responders than when you're working with civilians. And what I mean by that, in the civilian world, generally speaking, you're not really coming across people who know each other that you see in the therapy room. In the first responder world, happens a lot, right? Or I get brought in and I'm working with a department, and someone that I see for therapy is sitting in that audience, right? So, for example, with me, I don't act like I always tell them, I act like I don't know you personally in any way. You can say hello if you want and acknowledge me, but I'm not going to be like, oh, hey, Greg, how's it going? Like, and act like I know you. And then people are like, oh, how did you already know her? Right. So that would be an example of like something that is super, super important, specific to the first responder community, to also encompass that confidentiality. So when we're talking about confidentiality in therapy in general, there's what's called the limitations to confidentiality. So the only circumstances that I'm legally required to break confidentiality would be if someone is in imminent danger of killing themselves. Okay. And imminent is a very specific word. This means that either someone directly tells me or alludes to the fact that they're going to kill themselves. Like, I'm not going to see them next week. Like, hey, thanks for your help, doc, but I made my decision. Best of luck to you, but I'm out, type thing, right? those kinds of imminent uh, indications would require a break in confidentiality. And I think it's really important to say that to first responders too. I work with more first responders than not that experience some form of suicidality, whether they're thinking about suicide or they just don't want to wake up tomorrow or they attempted suicide before. That's not going to break confidentiality. Telling me that you're thinking about killing yourself or have had thoughts about it isn't going to require me to break confidentiality. It is really only if, based on the information I have, that I suspect that you might go home and kill yourself today, right? Or kill yourself tomorrow. You have a plan to kill yourself this weekend and you're going to do it, right? Those are the circumstances that require that break in confidentiality.
Got it. Yeah, no, and I appreciate you breaking that down and kind of explaining, because I feel like that's not really talked about enough or shared enough, where like, especially like specific to police officers, where if we do say something where we get placed on a psychiatric hold, they take your firearms from you. You
Yeah.
know, it's like,
Yep.
okay, what the hell am I going to do if I can't carry a firearm and I'm a police officer? You know, same thing for military. If you're in a role where you carry a firearm, you're military police in the Marine Corps, whatever, what are you going to do? You know, and then you have that identity, you have the shift. Everybody's going to know that something's off. So, now I think it's super important. I appreciate you explaining that, because I feel like some people are super hesitant to be open and honest and share because the risk is so huge with this community.
Yeah. 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 That's a big one. I really like to break that one down because I've heard from so many first responders that they're afraid to say anything, or they're afraid to go to therapy because they've been having these thoughts and they're afraid that they're going to get called 5150 on them, right? Or the other circumstance that requires breaking confidentiality, if there's someone who's in imminent danger of being killed by this person, right? And in California, like, again, that has to be really specific. By the way, here's a fun fact: if I'm working with someone who literally tells me that they murdered someone a year ago, I can't break confidentiality. That stays with me. I legally cannot, right? Not that I want to be working with people who've murdered people, but my point being is, like, even that I can't break confidentiality with. The only thing that I could is if, Greg, we're in a session and you say, my neighbor, John Smith, he's seen his last day today. I'm tired of shit. And, he's going to get what's coming to him tonight. Right? Like he's I'm strapping myself up and he's going to get what's coming into him tonight when he's sleeping. Right? Something like that. Then I'd have to break confidentiality to try and protect John Smith.
Yeah. Got it. And with those that you see within our community, I guess, what's the biggest concern or the misconception or stuff that he or she's kind of mostly worried about?
You're talking about in terms of confidentiality?
Yeah.
I hear a lot. I say most often I hear, like, am I going to lose my job somehow? Right? Is this going to get out? And two, I'm afraid of my firearms being taken away. I've had I've had many first responders like ask me if, there's some kind of just general record where, like, the state, particularly in California, because of the strict gun laws, the state can see that they've gone to therapy and then they can't get a firearm, or their firearm gets taken away from them. And so, no, that they can't do that, particularly with a private pay provider. They have no access to anything. But even if you go through insurance, they can't do that. The only thing they would be on someone's record is if they committed a violent act of some sort. But through a private pay provider, if we're talking about me, no one has access to any of that. I cannot legally and do not talk to departments. If a captain comes into me, I can't even say whether you're in therapy with me, right? And so, not intentionally, but I've had some people reach out and say, hey, I referred so and so to you, did they get in touch with you? And I have to just say, I can't confirm or deny anything. And I say that whether that person got in touch with me or not, right? So, no access to anything. Like, no one knows
Sounds like the White House staff secretary, where it's like, oh, is this going on? No, neither can confirm or deny.
Yeah, the press secretary. Yeah, exactly.
You're like, next.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. And I think that's very important to ensure that, like, this community knows that, right? Because you can lead a horse towards the water, but you can't make him or her drink, where it's like, we can have the most smoothest, most confidential process to go to therapy and can get get you connected in days, but it's totally like you can have all of these resources, but it's up to that person. That's where it gets kind of frustrating sometimes, because like I care so much about it and I do not want to see more people like die by suicide and all that. But you just have to think like, hey, the resources there, we're trying to do whatever we can. But
Yeah, I know, especially when it's like, no, I can't do that because I can't afford it. And they're like, how about we pay for it? And they're like, I need to think about it.
yeah.
What do you need to think about here? Right?
Yeah. Well, and so that's the cool thing. If you're listening to this, and you don't already know, so the Overwatch Collective will pay for you to go work with Brooke. So we'll pay 100% for the first 3 sessions, and then we drop down into our tier system. So we pay 60% for the next 5, and 50% for the next 5, and then so on. And then if there's any point where that first responder, service member, family member, whatever, cannot afford to go to the next tier, that gets brought to our attention. We vote on it, like which tier to go back on. And then we've never denied one. Like if someone's in desire, like just
Dire.
there you go. Holy hell, thank you. If someone's like in therapy, they're doing good, they're enjoying it, and it's like, hey, this is going to be an extra $20-$30 on talk for sessions, we're like, yes, please go, like 100%. So I don't foresee us ever denying anybody. So I just wanted to share that really quick, just for the audience, since you're given insight on yourself, talking about therapy, everything, and what that looks like with you, just so that if anybody's listening and they do want to work with you.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, your guys' resource is incredible and extremely needed. And I truly feel really fortunate to be able to now, especially like when I go to departments and I'm giving trainings or speaking, and they'll be like, how can we see you for therapy? Now I can be like, if you're financially unable to afford my full fee, there is this option. And so that's really huge. It's so needed because that's a huge, obviously an understandable barrier to access to care, is if you can't use your insurance and you can't afford the session fee, is to have that. But yeah, I really like to emphasize to, anyone who's considering therapy, but definitely first responders, is to really, really view it as finding someone who's a good fit for you. And like, I even say, hey, if I'm not a good fit for you, that's fine. Like, get to know and interview each of your potential therapists that you might be interested in working with. Talk to them. Each of them should offer a free consultation call where you can talk to each other. You can ask your questions, find out why they say they were like, how are they competent working with first responders? What's their experience in that? What's their background? Have they ever, done this? Have they worked specifically with this, with what you're looking for and getting help, right? Asking these questions and really getting a feel for them and going from there. And if you start to see someone and it's not working out in the first couple sessions, don't just give up entirely, right? It can take time. Like it took me, I went through several different therapists before I like really found mine and felt, really confident or comfortable with my psychologist. And I was like, okay, this is the good fit. And not necessarily the other ones were like not good at what they did. This was just a better fit with with me and what I was looking for, So I really emphasize that too, it's the most important, and scientific research supports this. The biggest factor in prognosis, which means how well someone does in therapy, how, them getting better, is the rapport, their fit, and how comfortable and the fit with the therapist. So you can have the most highly experienced person that you're working with, but if it's not a good fit for you, there's going to be a ceiling.
Got it. That's the first time I've ever heard that before, but I like it and it makes sense. Because if you're not comfortable, are you going to be fully open and sharing? You may not. And so knowing that, how does that kind of like, because I would be so stressed out if I were doing an intake session, right? So you do intake sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like during that, like is there a lot of stress that goes on there? Or are you like, oh, I hope this person likes me, or how do you go into these intake sessions?
I'm not going to sit here and act tough and be like, oh, I never care whether someone's going to like me. I do.
Yeah.
I don't get too stressed. I've been doing it for so long, but of course I want them to like me and I want us to have a good fit. I don't know how to explain it. I guess I'm very much like my personality and my like who I am, like in my personal, like just real life is very much what I am in the therapy room as well. And so, I honestly get more stress sometimes when I start working with someone because I want to make sure that they're doing well and that they're getting better. And, there's always, I think we as therapists sometimes can get a little bit down on ourselves if we can't solve a problem immediately, and we put those unrealistic expectations on ourselves. So I think that's kind of where sometimes I feel the most stress. Like sometimes I'll have someone show up and then they're like in a lot of distress, like something had happened and they're in a lot of distress. And, in one session, I can't just, I'm not a wizard and I can't just take, here's exactly what to do and then you're going to feel great. Right. And, you finish the session and I always just feel this like huge tug in, and I'm like, okay, did I do everything I could? And, I wish I could take that away from them at that moment. And that's just kind of the push pull of being in a helping profession. But
Yeah. Same
I'd say
thing
that's
with us.
kind of where most of my stress lies.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the same thing with us, right? Like if something doesn't go right or the baby, you're doing CPR on the baby and you're like, fuck, did I do everything right? And there's the guilt that comes along with it after, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But going on calls and like not having a positive outcome and like it really fucks people up where you're like, if I did this, or hey, I made a mistake on X, Y, and Z, and this was a bad
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah.
There's some challenges with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely in our profession, I just feel like it's not really talked about that much. It's almost like the elephant in the room. But I'm pretty open about it. And I talk with a lot of other like colleagues about it, like I'm in some consultation groups or I have some colleagues, that I know really well that I'll reach out to and I'm like, man, struggling, like after this session, obviously I don't talk about specific details of the person, but just like, I feel like I didn't do enough. I feel like I should have done more, and it'll just weigh down on me. And then that's when I need to use my own techniques on myself and do what I need to do to process. And so I don't carry that with me for too long because, as you probably know, when we let these things pile up and snowball and snowball and snowball, it starts to come out in a lot of different ways that aren't particularly ideal.
Yeah. That's the common theme in our community, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't talk about anything, you don't debrief stuff, and you don't go to therapy, you don't do EMDR for a certain incident, and then you just like your body keeps the score. I always like mention the book, um, but it's like true. And then one day, you're like 10 years into your career, you could be like, wow, I really need to go to therapy on this incident. And you're like, whoa, like hold on here. We have so much to work on before because you've been
Yeah.
seeing all this fucked up shit for 10 years essentially, and you haven't talked about any of it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, the I call them mental check-ins or the mental, just being proactive with these things are so important. And what I mean by that is waiting, like you said, until okay, years later, and a lot of this is piled up. Um, you know, a lot of times I see with my first responders that it takes the shit to hit the fan before they, you know, need help, or they think that shit needs to be hitting the fan in order to get help, right? And that's just not the case. Therapy can be utilized as a proactive tool to make sure that that snowball doesn't just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why it's so important to like gain tools and do things proactively in the job to prevent that snowball from getting too big or getting too big too fast, and it's doing what I call like mental check-ins, like after every major incident and checking in. Okay, what am I thinking? What's going through my head? What kind of thoughts am I having about this? What am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling physically? Checking in and intentionally checking in like that. And then from there, assessing, okay, then, do I need anything? No, I'm actually truly okay. Like, I'm not actually really bothered. I'm not really noticing. I'm blaming myself for anything or telling myself I should have done something different. Yeah, I'm a bit frustrated or a little bit sad about that. But, this is like, I have like, it's not something I really need to do much about, or I'm a little bit bothered by that. I'm going to reach out to my guy in peer support that I like to talk to, or maybe talk to my wife about it a little bit. Or I'm really, really rocked by this and I need some help because this is really impacting me not only on the job but off the job as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I love it. And so I guess the last thing in regards to like the therapy, what I was just kind of thinking about is like the competency aspect. So for someone who's listening to this and I'm trying to like think of being a listener and this is the first time meeting you and listening to you and be like, oh wow, do I want to work with Brooke or not? So like can you break down like your competency, like some of the training that you've done specific to our first responder and military community?
Yeah. I mean, I've literally been just immersed in it for 12 to 15 years. So, working in VA hospitals, I've worked and trained in trauma units, both inpatient and outpatient. I've worked with combat veterans from every era dating back to the Korean War. Um, I've done also, was big into research too. So not only was I gaining the clinical experience, but I call myself a scientist practitioner, which means that I use science to inform my clinical work, and I use my clinical work to inform the science that I was, the research and the studies that I was doing. So, being also an embedded clinician in a first responder department, just being trained by other first responder psychologists and just being immersed in the culture and learning the ins and outs of it, and learning the specifics of it's very different working with first responders in the therapy room than it is with civilians, because of the cultural aspects and unique aspects of the job. So yeah, just a lot of, I mean, basically over 10,000 hours of training, specifically working with military and first responders. And then, like I said, I've also published, I've published over 20 scientific papers. I've run a couple of national-wide studies on first responders, collecting data. My entire dissertation project was looking at PTSD and suicide among first responders through a particular theory of suicide. So that was about 5 years of writing grants and collecting data and then analyzing the data and doing all of that. So not necessarily like a training where I signed on online and did like an hour training, but just fully being immersed in working with directly and being in the research lab, so to speak, of military and first responders.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. And so what I kind of want to touch on now, and I know you have all this training with PTSD and suicide, first responders and military, and I kind of want to touch on that because I'm interested to hear your perspective on the common themes that we see and like what our community can like look out for.
Yeah.
So I don't even know where to start with that, but just
Yeah.
take it away. Just go like anything PTSD and suicide, and we'll just talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about suicide. Obviously, we know that suicide is extremely high in the first responder and military communities, much higher than in the civilian population. And I like to really stress when I'm doing like suicide related trainings for agencies and stuff that it's not, once you swear in and you put the uniform on, automatically you're at higher risk of suicide, right? That's not only a false narrative, but could be very damaging, right? Being like, okay, because you're a cop, you're at higher risk of killing yourself. That's what that means, right? That's not the case. There's a lot of factors that go into someone attempting or completing suicide. And it's not just the job, but there's a lot of unique factors about the job that put someone potentially at higher risk if they're not, getting the help or, being proactive about these things. Things like the cultural stigma related to mental health or having needing any form of help whatsoever, struggling in any way is a sign of weakness, right? And so first responders and military are much more likely to hold these things in. And when we hold things in, it can then make them worse and make them perpetuate, which in the worst possible cases can lead to suicide, right? So it's not I'm a cop or I'm a firefighter, so that automatically means I'm at higher risk of suicide. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. And I really like to stress that when I'm talking about like some myths about suicide, like suicide is impulsive, right? Never is it impulsive. Ever is it impulsive. And I really like to emphasize that. it is something that builds up over time. And for some people, they think this must have been an impulsive decision because he seemed fine. Yeah, he had his bad days and stuff, but he never seemed like he was suicidal. He seemed like he loved his life, right? So something must have happened. It must have been that, oh, that one thing that happened at work that week, that critical incident, or, he didn't get that promotion. And that's why he killed himself, right? This is a buildup over time. And why that's so important too is I like to emphasize that there's always some point that we can intervene to prevent that buildup from getting to that point. It takes time for someone to get to that point. And I just it's so important for people to understand that.
Yeah, and I think that's the importance of the, like you said, the check-ins after certain calls or
Mhm,
on a biannual basis. I know some departments now are going to annual check-ins,
mhm.
which is a good thing just to like normalize like talking to someone. And maybe if it does hit one person where it's like, okay, hey, this was actually pretty good, I'd like to work on this more, then that's a win. Um, but yeah, I've heard it. I've heard it both ways where like suicidal ideation and like the thought of it is like a common theme for the community. And then I've also heard like it's not a common theme. Like if you're having those thoughts, then you're like, whoa, like am I the only one that's having these thoughts? And I'm curious to get your opinion on that.
It's extremely common. Extremely common. I'd say, I mean, this isn't an exact number, but I'd say at least 75% of the first responders I work with currently or have had suicidal ideation. And just to kind of dive it, suicidal ideation means a lot of different things. Like a lot of different things can fall under that umbrella. Um, it could be for some people that they have what we call morbid ideation, which is they're not really like thinking that they want to kill themselves. They just are like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. Or, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I'm tired. I'm tired and I don't want to feel like this anymore. Right. So I just like, if I wasn't here tomorrow, then I'd be fine with that, to I want to die, but I'm not really thinking about killing myself, so to speak, to I would like to kill myself, or to I'd like to kill myself and I think I'd like to do it by jumping off of a bridge, right? I mean, so there's a lot of variations of ideation, but overall, it's extremely prevalent in the first responder community, but it's so stigmatized that most of the first responders that I work with think that they are the only ones who experience it. And therefore, that means that they are weak, they're crazy, there's inherent, something inherently wrong with them, that they are the ones experiencing this,
And
which
that's like,
perpetuates the problem.
yeah, 100%. And that's where like we're so good at like hiding our feelings because you're supposed to go on these calls and, like an active shooter, you're supposed to be like, oh, I'm not scared, I'm running in, or a suicide or anything. And you're like not supposed to show weakness if you're in a uniform.
Yep.
And that
Yep.
that transfers to outside of uniform at
Mhm.
home. And you always get like the, hey Greg, how's it going? Oh, I'm good. How are you? Cool, cool. And like that's just the common thing. But no, like since the culture says no and there's such a stigma behind it, I think that's one of the reasons why our suicide numbers are so high, where it's like maybe if it was like, hey, it is normal, like this is what you're going through, like I've seen it before, this is fine, and we can work on yourself if you want to, and we'll take care of you. But so what are some of the things that you wish you could see within our community to reduce the number of suicides?
Just normalizing these things more, people being more vocal about experiencing them. And honestly, it comes from the top down, meaning that individuals and in positions of leadership, higher ranking individuals being open about these things. That doesn't mean you have to go into nitty gritty details about all these things, but just saying like, I've been struggling with this, or hey, 5 years into my career, I started really struggling with XYZ and I reached out for help, or, I started using peer support, or I saw a therapist for a couple of months. And, or after a call, man, that call was tough for me. Is anyone else struggling with that? Like, I don't know. I can't really get it out of my head. Right. I mean, talking about these things, talking about them, there's no, it's not any crazy life-changing scientific wild thing, right? It's like it's talking about it, because the talking about it normalizes it. And when we normalize things, the stigma goes down. This is my personal opinion. I don't have any science to support this, but I truly believe that the stigma is a huge, if not the biggest reason why we see such high suicide rates. Because again, suicide is the outcome of untreated mental health issues. It is not the symptom. It is the outcome, and the worst possible outcome. That snowball has been rolling and getting bigger and bigger for a long time. And in a lot of cases, particularly in the first responder community, that's because they don't feel comfortable reaching out. They don't feel comfortable talking about it. They don't feel comfortable reaching out. So they continue to suffer in silence. And again, in the worst case scenarios, some of those individuals end up taking their own life.
Yeah. I trust me, I could not agree more. I'm literally on the same page with you. And like being a first responder myself and also in the military, like nobody comes back from a call and you sit down and you do like, okay, like, hey, what did you do? Let's bullet point this out so we could all do like our supplemental reports, and whoever's the investigating officer can document all this. Nobody sits there and goes, hey, like that call really got to me. Like anybody else, that shit does not happen.
Yeah.
I've been a cop for 9 years and 1 month now. I have never seen that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's not the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, and I like how you say like it starts from the leadership. And so my thing with that is like you have obviously those in leadership positions have been in for maybe over 15, 20 years, right? Where that culture was so much different back then. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, like there's a learning domain in the state of California through Peace Officer Standard and Training. Learning Domain 31 talks about mental health. And you have to talk about it for X amount of hours, where your captain, your deputy chief, your battalion chief, whatever, did not have that. And that was still the culture, and the stigma back then was worse than what it is now. But you have to be in a leadership position to be making changes, like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is not to discourage anyone who's not like, I encourage everyone to do this, but I'm saying also that if we're talking about like really making massive department-wide agency changes, I've seen that happen when it comes from the top down, because understandably so, individuals who aren't in positions of leadership, individuals who aren't, ranked, in the hierarchy, or higher rankings, they're afraid to speak up, rightfully so, right? I mean, I'm not going to say they're like, why are they afraid, right? There are potential repercussions for speaking up about these things. So it's less likely that someone is going to bring it up. But the phenomenon I've seen over and over and over again, it will never stop amazing me, is when someone, in a leadership position, like breeds a culture of like normalizing talking about this. And the way they do that is they talk about it about themselves, right? And then all of a sudden you see other people starting to come out the woodwork because they're getting the message that it's safe to talk about these, or to even acknowledge that call sucked. Like, again, we don't even have to go into like the nitty gritty details and your deepest, darkest feelings or anything like that, but just acknowledging that fucking sucked, like that sucked. And it's bothering me, that is okay and normal to do. So, and like you're saying too, and because I do a lot of work on the, like the agency side of things, I can pretty clearly tell sometimes when I get brought in to just be the check mark, like, okay, we're meeting this standard, right here. We're going to bring a psychologist in and she's going to talk, and then she's out of here. And then we'll do it again next year when we have to do it annually. Right. Yeah. As opposed to, again, breeding a culture where, it's not a once a year thing, or we're not just checking it off, that this is a culture where we want to be more open about and accepting of and normalizing of all these things that the large majority of first responders experience, but they suffer in silence with, and think that they're uniquely, like I said, damaged in some way because no one else talks about it. No one else talks about it. So they think they're the only ones who experiences this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've seen it. The whole reason why like I wanted to start this with Jesse was like, because one of my buddies, Ben Ridey, we worked at the same department, had money, married, lived in San Francisco, beautiful wife. Everything was going good, right? And then like all of a sudden, out of the blue, I wake up in Boston. It was St. Patty's Day. I was there for the parade. And they're like, hey, I saw a picture on Instagram of him and it said RIP. And I'm like, the fuck? And it's like, it's so common in our community to hear about someone dying by suicide. And then the comments after, right? Where it's like, we never would have thought Greg would do this, right? That was the last person I would have thought. I can't believe it. Something else must have happened. Like, and that's so, it's literally such a common theme that it's like, okay, like maybe we should do something, like
Yeah.
why do we
Yeah.
keep hearing about this? Why, like we had so many police officers killed by suicide by their own hands in 2023, more than being like shot and killed in line of duty or anything. It's like
Yeah.
it's so frustrating.
Yeah. And that's here's the thing, those, like you're saying, in that circumstance, which we hear about all the time, like that would be the last person I thought, would do that. Those are the people at highest risk of actually completing suicide because they're really good at hiding it, right? When people actually show that they're suffering, not that we want to see that. We don't like to see people suffering, but it's more likely that someone will reach out for help and intervene, or, do you need help? Or that maybe that person will seek help themselves. The people who are so good at remaining stoic and like everything is okay when everything inside is in turmoil, those people are at the highest risk of suicide, which is also why I emphasize when I'm talking about the myths about suicide. Not only is suicide not impulsive, that it takes a long time to get there, and that we want to make sure we are equipped to notice signs and symptoms to reach out to people that we love, that there is some form of accountability too, meaning that if I'm really good at hiding it, people think I'm okay, right? There is at some point where I need to be able to at least express that I'm not doing well. Maybe I don't know where to go or who to go to for help, but at some point, if I'm just hiding everything inside, no one's even going to know to reach out to me, right? And so that's really important too. And I say that because I do a lot of moral injury work, and there's so much moral injury associated with having someone we care about die by suicide. And it's like, I should have known, I should have seen the signs, I should have done this, I should have done that. And people really, really blame themselves for that. And so it's also important to note that people get, particularly first responders and military, get really, 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 really good at hiding all of this, right? There's not always signs. That's the misconception, is that there's always signs. There's not always observable signs to other people on the outside. And again, oh yeah, so-and-so went through a rough couple weeks, or sometimes they get depressed, but that doesn't always mean that someone's going to die by suicide. It's not immediately because they're having a rough time. Okay, that must mean that they're thinking about, killing themselves in some way, right? So there's not always indicative signs and symptoms on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and it starts day one in the police academy, fire academy, or boot camp, right? Like I went through Marine Corps boot camp, and you're taught like pain is weakness leaving the body, right? Like you're not supposed to show weakness. If you show any sort of weakness, you're getting fucking yelled at by 2 drill instructors.
Yep.
Screaming at the top of your lungs, right? And it's like that's just how we like. Yes, it makes you really good in combat and really good at doing your job and everything. But when you think about like the mental health side of things, like you're not supposed to show weakness. You're not supposed to show that you're tired when you're hiking 10 miles with 50 pounds of gear, like that's where it starts to ingrain in our heads. So
yeah. That's why I always say that the thing is that the dichotomy here is that the things that make someone really good at what you do could also potentially become risk factors, right? If not actively worked on, if not mindfully kept in check, I'll say, could be the things that could be risk factors as well. Like you're saying, like it's adaptive to be able to keep powering through on the job, right? And to do these things. It's adaptive to do that. But we don't want to be hiding those things and being that stoic throughout, while we're off the job and we're at home, and, we shut off the empathy switch and all those things when we're at home with our family, and that we're always in that zone, right? That's where we start to have the imbalance or the hypervigilance, right? So it's adaptive to be hypervigilant when you're in the military or when you're a first responder. You need to be like that. And I always say that, first responders are always going to have a higher level baseline of hypervigilance, even when off the job, and that's okay. But if it's so extreme, right, that it's starting to impact your life when you're off the job too, that's when we need to get it in check, right? So the things that are adaptive could also become risk factors.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned, or I saw on one of your stories, sorry, my dogs are punching me trying to go outside. So if you see
Oh,
the
the blinds moving?
the blinds move, they're literally like punching me right now.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I saw, or I don't know, a couple weeks ago on your Instagram story, you had like posted a question like, is suicide selfish? And why or why not? I'm interested in your thoughts on that and just kind of some of the replies you got.
It's a mix. It's always a mix. Sometimes people say yes, it is, because it's like they only thought about themselves, like they couldn't take the pain anymore and they left behind a wife or a husband with kids, and like and but then it's also like, no, it's not selfish because they were struggling so bad, and that's what they needed to do for the struggling to stop.
Hmm.
That was two of them. And then some people were just like, yes. And I'm like, okay, like any reason why or anything? But
Like just straight to
yeah,
it.
just straight, yes, it is. Like, okay. But I don't know. And I guess maybe it depends on each circumstance.
Mm,
That's kind of
yeah.
where I'm at, where I'm like, you cannot put a blatant, like a blanket over and be like, yes, suicide is selfish for everybody. Like, I think it depends on each situation. That's my opinion.
Yeah. So I like to talk about this too when I'm giving suicide trainings. Is I think, and again, this is just my personal opinion. I think that the most detrimental myth related to suicide is that it's selfish. I think it's dangerous. And why is that dangerous? Why do you think that it would be dangerous to have thinking that people have the belief that because you're thinking about suicide that you're selfish? Are you going to reach out for help if you're like, someone's going to judge me and think I'm selfish for this? They're not. They're not going to reach out for help, right? If they're going to be like, they're going to judge me or think I'm a terrible person for even thinking about this because I have two kids, they're probably not going to reach out for help. Something I really like people to understand about suicide. I've been working and specializing and researching in suicide for many, many years now. And I'd say 99% of the time, there's an underlying theme with individuals who are strongly considering suicide or have attempted. And it's that they believe that they are a burden. They believe they are a burden on other people and that them dying is what's best for these other people that they love. Now, is that true? No, it's a very unfortunate and obviously dangerous belief to have. However, selfishness is a very different thing. Selfishness means we're not considering anyone else. And for the individuals that I know that have seriously thought about, planned out, or attempted suicide, they put a lot of thought into it. And they arrived at this is what's best for them, not only right now, but in the future as well. My kids are better off without me. Like I am toxic, right? And so this is by the way, scientifically proven. There's a theory, like I said, that I used with my dissertation, developed by a famous researcher who researches with specifically first responders. But one aspect of suicide is that we call it perceived burdensomeness. And it's that idea of like people are better off without me. This is what is best for them. And so not only does it go in contrary to this idea of selfishness, which just basically means like, I don't give a shit about my kids or what they think or what's best for them. But it's actually, it's very much the opposite of what's actually going on. And it's the idea or the fear of someone being judged as selfish is what prevents them in a lot of cases from actually reaching out for help.
Yeah, I've never heard that explanation before at all. And like when you're explaining, I'm like, yes, that makes sense. That's why like I don't think you can say like, yes, it is selfish, or no, it is not. Like I don't really think that any part of it's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it depends on the
There's
situation, like I said.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it. That theory I'm talking about is called the interpersonal psychological theory of suicide for anyone who wants to look it up. But it was developed by a researcher named Thomas Joyner. He's over in Florida State. But basically what he looks into, so if you look at just the stats of suicide in general in the US, this is the stats from like a couple years ago, but somewhere near like 10 million US adults reported having serious thoughts of dying by suicide, something around like 1.8 attempted, right? That's a big gap between those two things, right? What gets someone to the point from really seriously thinking about and planning it to actually enacting it, right? And so what he posits is that dying by suicide is not just dependent on wanting to die. That's not strong enough to get someone to want to die, even if they just really don't want to die and they really want to kill themselves. But there's other factors that are present there that can lead someone to actually attempting suicide. This would be perceived burdensomeness. This would be thwarted belongingness, is what he calls it, when you're not, when you feel like, you know, an outsider, like you don't belong. But the other factors are related to someone's tolerance of pain and whether how big their fear of death is. So when someone has a really strong desire to die, they have a decreased tolerance to pain, and they're very desensitized to death, they have the highest risk of actually attempting suicide. And this is particularly applicable, which is why he studies it a lot in military and why I used it with first responders, because military and first responders kind of have to be a little bit more tolerant to pain. Wouldn't you say? Physical pain. You guys put yourself in dangerous situations all the time. You're seeing death and harm all the time. So you're a little bit more desensitized than your average civilian. So there's already some factors in there that, if combined with I'm a burden to the other people around me, I'm toxic, people are better off without me, and this world is better off without me, that can then lead to someone dying by suicide.
Yeah, makes sense. Such a good explanation of it. And I wish we had like all the time in the world. And I've already been thinking about this. Like, we're going to need to do a part 2 to this. But yeah, cause you don't really, and that comes back to the whole stigma and culture. Like, I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say, but then I'm also like, everything comes back to the stigma and culture, right?
Yeah.
Because if everything was normalized and it was like, hey, we have all these amazing systems in place for you, confidential or not, whatever, and like figured out the most confidential way for you to get help to like competent therapists, then maybe we wouldn't have any of that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe you would not be be like in your own head and like thinking about all these things but trying to hide it, or yeah.
I mean, listen, unfortunately, there will always be, you know, I'll call them severe cases, right? There's no way we can just wipe suicide off the face of the earth, you know, that we can get to the point where no first responders die by suicide. However, it can be significantly decreased. And I agree. I think it all comes back to the culture. And I have a visual model that I use when I talk about proactively looking at things, but I think about first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense. The third line of defense is the crisis intervention, right? That's when the shit has hit the fan, right? Someone's really not doing well. Maybe they're actively suicidal, or like they've lost their job, their wife's leaving them, they've lost custody of their kids, like things are going really bad. And of course they need help at that time. But what if we kind of switched our mind to those first and second lines of defense? First line of defense, and this is most ideal, keeping healthy people healthy. When things are going well, let's keep doing those little things that add up, that keep us feeling well, right? What are the things that are working, right? Second line of defense is shit hasn't hit the fan yet, but you know, I'm starting to not sleep very well. Me and my wife have been fighting more often, you know, like time to start kind of intervening early. It's early intervention, right? Before that snowball gets so big. And we all get to this point. We all get to all 3 points sometimes, right? But we definitely get to the second point of like, things aren't going well. Okay, time to, instead of just saying, whatever, I'm just going to keep going on and, you know, not, you know, I'm just going to shut it down and just keep going on because shit hasn't hit the fan. What can we do to intervene to get us back to that, okay, feeling good again? And so I feel like, particularly in departments and agencies, there's things in place, and it's almost like a third line of defense focus. You know, it's like, what do we do when a crisis happens? And of course we need those things in place, But just as important, in my opinion, more important, is those first two lines of defense. And that first line of defense comes in the culture. It's just normalizing all of this, having a wellness focused culture, a culture where things are normalized and talked about, etc. And that can really prevent a lot of people from getting to that third line of defense.
Yeah, I like it. And so that's what you go and you talk about when you go to departments and leadership's in there and everything. And how do they kind of perceive that? Are they like, hey, that's a good idea? Or is it like how does that taken?
It depends. It depends on, I'd say overall it's really good. I typically get to, it's not necessarily groundbreaking. It's just just like almost like a shift in perception on these things, right? And so I think it's pretty well received, and I love using analogies. It's just the way my brain works, but I always think about it like in relation. I like to apply like analogies related to physical health because I feel like that's more acceptable, right, in our brains. And so the idea is, I'll just use me for example. I started having back problems a year ago, and I'd never had back problems before, and it was bad. Like it was really painful for a while. And if you've ever had back problems, like it impacts like your quality of life and everything. And I come to find out that from like 6-7 years of being hunched over a computer and not focusing on my posture and also having unattended injuries from when I was an athlete, that my back started to take on too much of a burden. And so even though I wasn't really noticing the signs and symptoms over the years, my back finally gave out. It was like, fuck this, I'm done, right? So I had to go see a doctor to find out what the problem is and get x-rays. Then I had to start going to PT. Now I'm still doing all the things I learned in PT, even though I'm feeling good, because those are the things that work. If I just dropped all of that and I just started going back to, okay, I'm feeling good now, so I'm just going to drop all of that and just go back to my status quo, my back pain would come back, right? And it's the same thing with our mental health. All those little things that we do to make ourselves feel good, that are I said, that we're doing when we're feeling well, are so important, and they're little things. It's not like life-changing things we need to be doing, just little things to be incorporating on the day-to-day to keep ourselves as mentally healthy as possible and as resilient as possible on the job as well.
I like the analogy.
Yeah.
I do. That's kind of how my brain works too. And I think if you're in like a room full of people and you're trying to explain that, they're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, because I have back pain, I have knee pain, whatever. Like our bodies are pretty all messed up. And they're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a mental health. They're like, oh, light bulb on.
Oh yeah, yeah. I do it all the time. This just happened like a month ago, and I had stopped doing. I got so busy. It's my excuse. I was like so busy. I had so much going on, so I stopped doing. I'll do like 15 minutes of certain type of like foam rolling. Most days, I'd say like 5 or 6 days a week, 15 minutes a day, right? Foaming like on my cervical spine and doing just some like thoracic opening stuff, right? I got so busy, I stopped doing it. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, my back started hurting. But I didn't say, oh, immediately. I didn't go, oh, it's because of that. I'm going, God, like, I can't believe it came back. Like, I'm just never going to be able to get rid of this. I can't believe like all these stuff. And then my fiance was like, you haven't been doing any of your shit. And I'm like, well, I've been so busy. It's like, what do you want me to tell you? Like you stop doing the stuff that keeps you feeling good. And I'm like, right. So when we start kind of lacking on those things, then we notice that stuff might start to come out again. Same with mental health. I all of a sudden notice that I'm like for several nights in a row for a week straight, I'm like tossing and turning in my sleep, and I'm just feeling like extra hypervigilant, and I'm a little snippier than I usually am, right? And it's like, oopsies, right. I haven't been doing what I normally do for the last few weeks, like not checking my email past 6 p.m. and not doing my morning mindfulness exercise for 10 minutes, right? Oh yeah, that's kind of what's been going. Oh, and I cancel my therapy appointments because I've just been so busy, right? Like all these things.
And your fiance is like, I need you to get back to that so you can stop.
Like, for God's sake. Please.
So earlier you did, and I am kind of curious where you want to go with this, because I know you have a therapy session at 11 and I have another podcast at 11. So you talked about moral injury earlier, and then we also wanted to talk about PTSD and kind of dive into it and the symptoms, the effects, and how we can treat it and everything. We're not going to be able to talk about both in a timely manner, and I don't want to be cut short on explaining one.
Yeah.
So I'll let you pick, and then we're gonna have to schedule a part two. Um, that's just how it is. But I'm totally fine with doing that.
How about if we talk about post-traumatic stress and moral injury, but mostly about like how they're similar and how they're different?
Send it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, go.
So yeah, I do a lot of work with, I mean, I'm a trauma psychologist, so obviously I do a lot of work with post-traumatic stress and PTSI, PTSD. But I'd say one of, if not the most prevalent thing I see in the first responder community is moral injury, but it's just not really, it's not really understood, well understood. There's not like a lot of information out there on it. And it's hard to recognize in people, or it's hard for people to recognize in themselves. But so post-traumatic stress and moral injury are different. Okay. They do have a lot of overlapping similarities, and a lot of individuals who have post-traumatic stress, whether it be a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder or just they're experiencing some level of post-traumatic stress, a lot of them do also have moral injury. So when we're talking about post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress is the aftermath of experiencing some kind of exposure to trauma, right? So, and the way the medical world defines that, exposure to trauma, it could be you witness something, you witness someone's life or harm to someone, you directly experience it, right? You hear about it happening to a close family member or friend. Moral injury does not require exposure to trauma. Someone can experience moral injury based on an event that is not necessarily, does not fall into that category. However, trauma really kind of breeds the space to experience moral injury. So the thing that they really overlap on is the guilt. So the number one symptom of moral injury is guilt. Like, I don't think it's possible for someone to experience moral injury without experiencing guilt. And that's because they perceived that they have violated some kind of moral code of theirs or value, right? Whether they think they directly did something wrong or that they did something wrong by not preventing something from happening, right? So if I had just done this on that call, maybe that kid would still be alive. Or I should have done this, right? And then they maybe would still be alive, or the outcome would be different, right? So it's those should haves, would haves, could haves. Those are always what I tell people to think. What's going on in your head? What are the thoughts that have been circulating in your head for a long time that are leading you to feel guilty? Notice and look out for the should haves, the would haves, and the could haves, right? Those always lead to guilt. Because if we're telling ourselves, I should have done this, or I should not have done this, that means we believe there's some kind of wrongdoing and we're going to feel guilty about it.
Got it. Yeah, and I think so. That's a good way of explaining it, because still to this day, like, I've heard about moral injury, and I'm like, I'm sure that some of my friends at work and all, like, they don't know what moral injury is. Like, I don't think it's talked about enough. So it's like, and that's what we talked about earlier too. And I didn't even really realize that we were talking about it with doing CPR on like an infant, right?
Yes. Yes.
Where it's like, oh, if I took a different route to the call, maybe I would have gotten there sooner. Like, I think everybody experiences that. I'm going to go ahead and say that pretty confidently, because there are times where obviously we're trying to do our best, but we have shitty outcomes, shitty circumstances. There are some times where people do make mistakes, and there's a trauma from that or something catastrophic. So
yeah. So the post-traumatic stress side, what differentiates it from moral injury, or some aspects of post-traumatic stress that aren't part of moral injury, are the hypervigilance, right? They're just our heart rate being up all the time, always needing to know where the exits are, always don't want people walking behind your back, always needed to walk, have our weapon on us, like always needing to do these things, and the strong startle responses, right? So noticing that you get jumpy if someone calls your name or they walk up behind you and you're really jumpy, right? All those things are specific to post-traumatic stress. The moral injury is more so that guilt. For some people, it can really impact their spirituality. They experience a lot of hopelessness and grief, right? And it's all related to perceived wrongdoing in some way. And so the origins of moral injury came about because there was a bunch of researchers researching post-traumatic stress among Vietnam combat veterans through the VA. And so they start treating these combat veterans with evidence-based treatments for PTSD. And, they track their progress with like assessments and stuff. And what they found towards the end of the treatment is they were no longer meeting criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, but they were still experiencing debilitating symptoms that were impacting their life, particularly in relation to guilt. And they're like, what is going on? What is this? And that's how moral injury, that's how it like was coined, right? That's how it became a recognized syndrome, is because of that research. So they were finding that these combat veterans were still experiencing debilitating guilt related to events that they perceived some kind of wrongdoing. In some cases where there was actual wrongdoing, like atrocities that they committed, whether it be raping, or killing or torturing, while they were overseas. But there was always tied to that. And so that's how it became its own syndrome, its own entity, distinct from post-traumatic stress. But again, a lot of times moral injury is pretty common when there's trauma involved, but it doesn't necessarily require trauma. So for example, one of the most common types of moral injury I talk about within the first responder world is what I call first responder family versus civilian family. That first responders have to try and balance, like being fully identified with and in their job and involved in their job, which obviously isn't a Monday through Friday, 9 through 5, and you get all the federal holidays off. Right. So being fully involved in the job and feeling, like the people you work with are your family, while also balancing your husband, your wife, your kids at home. And there starts to become like a discord there. And it's like a lot of guilt that first responders feel, because they're like, if I, put less attention to my first responder family, then that's violating what my values and my beliefs. But then I have to sacrifice my civilian family if I'm fully putting myself into my first responder family. So that's an example of one that doesn't involve trauma, so to speak, but that is very common that I see among first responders.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I'm like I already have examples in my head. I'm not going to say them, but, and I have never heard of that before, right? Where it's like you have your civilian family and your first responder family, and like that's the moral injury, that's the guilt, or like if I slack off a little bit here, then there's going to be repercussions or effects,
Yeah. And there is treatment for moral injury, by the way. I specialize in a scientifically supported treatment. It's called trauma-informed guilt reduction therapy, but it's really it's really designed to address moral injury. So I use it with my first responders and military all the time. And sometimes, someone comes in and we treat their post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress, and they notice that they're feeling better, and they're feeling better in the post-traumatic stress area, but they still have lingering guilt related to these things. Then we'll do a little bit of, it's called trigger. But it's a short-term therapy. It's not that you're in therapy for years or anything. I'd say 8 weeks or less, generally speaking. People start to feel really, really better, a lot better with that. So there is treatment specifically for moral injury too.
Got it. Okay. All right. And is there, let's see, what are some of the big like misconceptions, or do you like when you explain like, hey, this is not post-traumatic stress, like, because I feel like a lot of people just say like, oh, that's post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress. Like when you explain people like moral injury, like how are their reactions to that? Or does that like not having like the PTSD labeled on their forehead and being like, oh, this moral injury thing, that's what's affecting me? It's sometimes are people like a little bit relieved that it's like a different type of name instead of PTSD because there's a negative connotation with PTSD?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I think it's more so being able to shine a light on or put a face to something. I think it's relief in the sense of, oh, okay, this is something like, other as opposed to like, I've just been feeling like shit for so long. Like I just carry this heavy backpack burden of guilt for so long. And like, oh, this is called something, right? This is something, like, hasn't just been this amorphous thing that I've been dealing with for so long, that it actually has a name, that there's actually a way to address it, right? That I'm not the only one, that there's actually a set of symptoms that are common that I've been experiencing with this. So I think it's relief in that sense. And I know that I talk about this in some of my post-traumatic stress trainings, but in terms of, a lot of people are trying to get rid of PTSD as a term itself, but I always like to kind of explain PTSI versus PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a clinically significant set of symptoms that once a certain number of symptoms are present and they've passed a certain threshold, that basically indicates, all right, these symptoms have gotten severe enough where someone needs evidence-based treatment for this. So like someone like me who assesses for post-traumatic stress, it's important to have a set of guidelines to be able to assess where someone is in their severity, right? So once they pass that threshold, right, that's when we say, okay, they meet criteria for PTSD. So it's the clinically significant symptoms that are present. PTSI, we're talking about the same symptoms, right? But that's more so we're talking about the biological underpinnings of how trauma and stress affect our brain, the actual injury to our brain, what's going on underneath. So what I like to say is someone can have post-traumatic stress injury and not have post-traumatic stress disorder, but every single individual who meets criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, which just means that there's enough symptoms present now that it's reached the point of severity that's higher, all individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder have post-traumatic stress injury. So just kind of like the conceptualization of the two, does that kind of make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. And this whole time you've said so many things and like explained it in such a different way that I've never heard before. And it's cool because you for me, and I don't have all the training experience you do, and like I can't even really read books. Like I'm not that smart, but when I hear like PTS, PTSI, PTSD, PTSG, the growth, and I'm like, okay, like fuck, I don't care. Like call it whichever one you want. Like whichever, if you want to say you have PTSI because you don't want to throw the D at the end because you're not like diagnosed, you weren't born with it, even though
Yeah.
you don't know everything that and that you just explained, if that makes that person feel somewhat like a little bit better and you're working on yourself, call
Yeah.
it whatever you want. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And it's important. It's important to use PTSD properly, meaning like, we're not just calling everyone, okay, you all have PTSD or anything like that, but it is really important. I work with a lot of people who come to see me and they're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have all these different things that are going on. And we do an assessment for it, right? We assess and we're like, and again, more often than not, I'd say almost always that like being able to say, okay, yeah, let me break this down for you and tell you about the symptom clusters of PTSD. And here's, what overlines. And they're always like, wow, yeah, yep, that makes sense. And that makes sense. And that makes sense. So it's not like slapping you have a disorder, right? All it means is that you have a certain number, you're experiencing a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And it's important on our end, on the treatment end, to be able to identify what those symptoms are and their level of severity and how they're impacting someone in order to be able to properly treat them. So I don't necessarily agree with just wiping away PTSD completely, because on from the clinician's end, on the medical end, it's really important for us to still be able to assess for these things, right? I think what really the distinction is, or what can really decrease that stigma associated with the D, is understanding that all it is, we're talking about the same symptoms. If we're talking about PTSI or PTSD, manifests the same exact way. It's just a matter of what level of intervention and care does this person need?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you explain that to people, are they like, oh, okay. Like then they get,
Typically.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty typically. So, I mean, again, I'm never going to be an absolutist, but I mean, I'd say, yeah, much like I don't really often, or I can't recall in recent memory of, having an experience where someone was just like super, just crumbled, at the, realizing that they, meet symptom criteria for PTSD. They might like process it and like we talk about, how they feel about that. And but once they kind of understand again that all that means is the same thing. It's still PTSI, and you can call it PTSI if you want, right? Yeah, it's just a conceptualization of it.
Got it. Yeah. And It sucks that we're on a time constraint because I could talk about so many things in regards to that. Like, how does that first responder feel after there's like an official diagnosis? Like, is it like, oh shit, like now what? Like now I have to go tell my department? What are the next steps?
Yeah.
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 What do you see with that?
I mean, so first off, like, I mean, I'm not like we talked about this at the beginning. So I'm not as much of a diagnostically based clinician, and it's only typically utilized when someone is actively like, I need to figure out what's going on with me, right? And then we do assessments, or sometimes we'll do, like, I call them like soft assessments, for like just to make sure that this is what's going on. And typically in the start of any treatment for post-traumatic stress that I do, we psychoeducate. So we start talking about the different symptom clusters of PTSD, and they'll start noticing like, yep, I do that and that and that and that and that. And they'll be like, wait, does that mean I have PTSD? And I'll be like, typically if you're endorsing like all the, these symptoms, and they've been affecting you to this, then yeah, you might have clinically significant symptoms, but this is why you're getting help right now, right? So yeah, I've had a lot of first responders like ask questions like about that. What does this mean that I have this? And it's like, when I say it's no biggie, meaning like nothing's different from before. It doesn't all of a sudden, because you have the D at the end of PTS, so all of a sudden it means that like this is some drastic grand difference. We still are gonna treat it the same way, and it's no different than whether someone just has the PTS or the PTSI. We treat post-traumatic stress, in a similar manner. We just want to make sure we're getting those higher levels of those more severe symptoms down. So, but yeah, I've had a lot of first responders ask about like, does my department know, blah, blah, blah. Again, back to the confidentiality thing. This does not get out. Everything is completely confidential. So department, anyone in the department, no one is notified about this.
Yeah, which is the huge part to that, because obviously we talked about like you don't want to get skipped up on the promotion, or you don't want your beat partner or your engineer to be like, hey, this guy, I don't know all the details, and they're not as educated as that person that you just worked with now. So you have someone that's uneducated and they just hear PTSD maybe, and they're like, oh shit, like I don't trust this person. My life depends on it, so there's a lot that goes into it. But I appreciate you explaining again that it's confidential between you and that person that you're working with.
And that's why I avoid, like, I've been asked to like come in and do like fitness for duty evaluations related to like diagnostic stuff. And I'm like, absolutely fucking not. No, that's ridiculous. Nope, not doing that. Not unnecessary, damaging to the people. Like, no. So that's not the way it is in therapy by any means. It doesn't go beyond the therapy room. And again, it adding the D at the end does not all of a sudden mean that, there's something drastically wrong, like you're uniquely damaged in any way, or that there's, this means it's a lot harder to treat or anything like this. It's just, you've been experiencing these symptoms, just post-traumatic stress. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate you breaking it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're kind of wrap this up. Are you good with that? So you have a little bit of time for the session.
Yeah. We'll have to jump on again for sure.
Yeah, we can always do a part 2. And then let's see. So if somebody does want to get a hold of you, obviously you're on the Overwatch Collective's website as a resource in California and Florida. Do you want your website, your Instagram? Do you want to shout those out really quick? Any other ways to get connected to you?
Yeah. So my website is www.centertas.com. So you can learn more about me and see the different things I offer, but you can contact me through there. And then Instagram as well, Dr. Brooke PhD. So doctor is spelled out, and then Brooke Brooke PhD. But yeah, I always encourage people to, whether you're looking for therapy, obviously, please reach out to me. But I really like to hear from people. I was just talking with, we were talking about this, a couple weeks ago on his podcast, but I really encourage people to I like networking too, right? So, if you hear something you relate to on this, you're not looking for therapy or anything like that, feel free to shoot me a message and say, hey, I heard you and I really, resonated with this, or I'm glad you said this. Like, it's just awesome to hear that. I like to hear from you, and I truly enjoy connecting. So I always tell people, feel free to reach out regardless whether or not you're seeking services from me.
No, I like that. Yeah, it's cool. It's funny that you say that. Yesterday, I got an email from this lady. She listened to season 6, episode 2 with Lauren, the U.S. Air Force retired captain, and we talked a lot about military sexual trauma. And she was like, "Hey, thank you so much for bringing this up. Here's some updated stats that I found out that I'm working on in case you talk about it next time. These are the most updated ones." Like, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." Like, just like a, "Hey, thanks for talking about this and everything." So, yeah. And then I got you set up with Travis. I know we talked about so many things on here, and like, especially he's big on like the leadership too. I need to get you on his podcast.
Yeah. We're working on it.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sweet. I love it.
Yeah.
He's a solid dude.
And then you're going to be on James's podcast. This is great. This is great. So
I know. I love it. It's and it's good. And I think like the more that we get this message out and we talk about it and the more podcasts that we do, and that's where the motto comes in, where I'm going to ask you, but like if it resonates with one person or one person hears like, oh my God, like this, like I'm not alone, or, hey, I have someone now that I can go reach out to. And I know it's confidential, so that's kind of, that's all I really care about.
Yep, that's what matters.
Yeah.
One more, one less.
There you go. So we like to ask everybody's explanation of what one more is one less means. So what does one more is one less mean to you?
Kind of what we were just talking about. And I think we talked about this when we Zoomed last week, but it's just the idea of, if I'm giving a training to 60 first responders and I have some in there that are like scowling at me and not talking the whole time, then I'm like, oh shit, this sucks, right? Oh man, do they not like me? But then as I'm walking to the bathroom at the end of the day, one stops me and says, hey, you mentioned this and like, I've really been, struggling with that. So thank you for talking about it. I didn't really, understand what it was. Then I'm like, one more is one less, right? I mean, so this reaching one person, having something that I'm talking about or that I'm doing that reaches one person, to me, makes it worth it.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. Thank you for explaining. All right, everybody, if you're listening to this and the other episode has not dropped, let's see. So this will drop the second Friday of February. And then we're going to do a part 2. Hopefully it'll be sometime before that. And then we'll get part 2 out. And then, like I say, we can always do like a podcast as well. We can always do it just on one topic, if anything. It's crazy when you do these podcasts. It's like, oh, we're going to talk about 8 things. And you're like, oh my God, we just went off the deep end on thing number 2. So been doing a lot of part 2s lately, but it's good. Cool. So looking forward.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Cool. Sweet. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you need anything from Brooke, want to get connected to her, anything, please let me know. We'll get you all connected. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care, Brooke.
Thanks, everyone.